over the weekend, yes, over the weekend, the Auckland City Council, actually go back one step. One of the reasons that the last government, in particular last Labour Greens government, lost power in the way in which they did at the last election was that they championed a reform of New Zealand's water system, or the way in which we drink, get rid of our water and basically regulate it, called Three Waters, as you know. And aspects of Three Waters just infuriated councils throughout New Zealand and communities. But also it wasn't just the policy itself, it was the way in which the policy was promoted. And there were complete lies being told to councils, which councils found really difficult to stomach. And as a consequence of that, many of them, in fact half of all councils officially, took legal action against the government to try and forestall, if you like, the impact of the Three Waters reform, as it was called, upon their local communities. Well, that's all gone now, and the government has said, nope, that's it, and nope, Three Waters is gone. Well, they haven't actually come up with the new legislation yet. They've given an indication of what it will look like, but it's only an indication. And changes to the Resource Management Act, to the National Policy Stand on Freshwater Management, to Te Mana o Te Wai, and to Three Waters are still in the offing, so to speak. And the devil is always in the detail, as I'm sure every one of you will appreciate. Well, in Auckland, over the weekend, the Auckland City Council has struck a deal with the coalition government that will see water rates rise by only 7%, instead of the anticipated 26%, because the government will allow Watercare, who look after water for the Auckland region, to borrow more money to invest in infrastructure under the scheme, with the cost of borrowing spread over a longer period. And mayors throughout the country, what do they think of this? And does it have applicability for every council in New Zealand? Now, I'll give you an example of my local council. I suspect it's Central Otago District Council. I suspect it's not unique. They're raising rates, I think it's an average of about 18%. And as a consequence of that, well, that's the proposal at the moment, and most of that money is apparently to be spent on water infrastructure, which I thought was all right, actually, but there you go. To talk to us, though, about what it means for councils in general, his council in specific, we're joined by the Mayor of Timaru, His Worship, Nigel Bowen, and he joins us now. Nigel, thank you very much for joining us. Lovely to have you on again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
That's an adequate introduction, isn't it? So once Three Waters went back to you, then you had to deal with the infrastructure and the way in which you borrow money. What's the maximum year you can put it over? Is it 25 years?
Yeah, well, I guess there's two elements of it. It's the loan itself, which is through, or generally speaking, through LGFA, which would be, that longer term, 25, sort of 30 years. But then it's the life of the asset and how you depreciate that over, a longer period. So some of that infrastructure asset's going to have a life of 80 to 100 years now.
Yes, that's exactly the point, isn't it? That if I'm putting in an infrastructure that's meant to last 50 to 75 years, and you want to, observe equity between generations, so make everybody pay an equal share for that over the next 50 to 75 years. I can't do that at the moment, can I?
Well, you can, and that's effectively what councils do. But there's potentially more tools that we could have in the toolbox to help sort that out. But I mean, the challenge with this whole conversation is that every area is quite different, and there's no one size fits all.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, can we, Nigel? Because you would think, I'm looking at the South Canterbury region. There's Timaru, there's Waimate, there is. What else have we got about? Parts of the Mackenzie would be in close proximity to you. And then as you go further on up the road, what have you got? The Ashburton District Council as well. Was that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
So you would think, wouldn't you? Sorry, am I missing one too, am I?
No, Waitaki to the south. So we're
Waitaki,
sort of having conversations with all those councils. Yeah.
Okay, so but the problem is the whole idea was that these new entities were meant to come in and somehow ensure that there was some sort of regional approach to water. But I've always thought that's odd because you're a mayor and I've been one too. I mean, you're actually delivering water to Temuka and you're taking it away from Temuka in terms of sewerage. Timaru, Geraldine, in your neck of the woods, Cave, Fairley, the small regions. So you've still got to deliver those services. Where are the cost savings in going to a regional water approach?
I think the cost savings will be in some of those, roles that we, that are a bit scarce across the country. So, in the past, our region and the same with our smaller councils off to the side might struggle to get a stormwater engineer as such. So I think there is the opportunity to gain efficiencies. It's in, how can we, grab that resource into the wider South Canterbury and have them work across boundary for, more than one council. So that's probably where you'll get some savings. What people don't talk about, but is a really good thing that's coming in the last Act through legislation, is the economic regulation. And that, again, is probably where you're going to see challenges for smaller councils. I look at my friends up the road at Mackenzie, their staffing base to meet another, regulatory standard will be a challenge. So how do we work together, in groups across the country to meet those standards? So those are some of the things that working together makes sense on.
Right, so you're not saying that necessarily the cost of something will be any less because you've got greater purchasing power, whatever. What you're saying is that the cost might be different if you finance it differently, A, and B, if you start sharing specialist staff. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look, and I think you summed it up. Water infrastructure is catchment based, whether it's Temuka or, Auckland's probably a different example where you've got so many, people and you need a metro solution and you need a provincial solution, and they'll be probably quite different.
Okay. Now, you've looked at the Auckland deal that's had quite dramatic effects. Obviously, the Mayor of Auckland, Wayne Brown, has been able to negotiate that particular issue with the government. Is there something there for you, do you think, and all the other mayors of New Zealand as a consequence of that?
Yeah, look, I think so. And it's going to be different for different areas. But for us, I look at that and think, well, actually, because just to compare us to Auckland, we don't have the borrowing challenges that they do as far as that debt cap. But there's still an advantages in going down that model. We're CCO across boundary sort of thing. But we've got a very low cost compared to what Auckland, water consumers would have now. So, what would be the advantage of us being in with Auckland? Not probably higher, water costs. So, everyone's infrastructure is at a different level across the country. So we need to be looking at the catchment bases. What are the challenges for them? How do we get to a standard and all those sort of things? And water regulation and economic regulation will be key in that we're investing to the standard. So I think most in the sector would welcome those parts of the legislation.